In the shadowy underbelly of Chicago, there is one unbreakable rule. You do not cross Gabriel Russo. As the capo of the North Side, Russo was a phantom. Ruthless, untouchable, utterly devoid of mercy. His private club, the Crimson, had a 100% turnover rate for waitstaff because one mistake meant you vanished. But in the winter of 2019, a desperate woman named Natalie Brooks didn't just survive her first shift. She shattered every rule in his book. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the true, bloody story of how a waitress brought the devil to his knees. The rain in Chicago doesn't wash the streets clean. It just makes the grime slicker. That's what Natalie Brooks was thinking as she stood outside the heavy iron, reinforced doors of the Crimson on a freezing Tuesday night in November. The wind cut through her second-hand coat like 1,000 tiny knives, the fabric so thin she could feel each individual raindrop as it struck her shoulders. Her fingers, already numb from the cold, fumbled with the strap of her worn leather purse. She checked her bank balance on her cracked phone screen. $14.32. The numbers glowed in the darkness like a death sentence. Inside her coat pocket, pressed against her racing heart, was a crumpled letter from St. Jude's Medical Center. Her mother's chemotherapy had been halted, payment overdue. $12,000 needed by Friday or they would discharge her. Natalie didn't have a choice. She didn't have the luxury of fear. She thought about her mother. Rebecca Brooks had been a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital for 27 years. She'd worked double shifts to put Natalie through community college. She'd never asked for anything in return. And now she was dying in a hospital bed because her daughter couldn't come up with $12,000. The insurance had denied the claim. Pre-existing condition, they'd said, as if her mother had chosen to get cancer, as if suffering was a choice. 6 months ago, a debt collection agency called Viper Financial had purchased her mother's medical debt. They'd tripled the interest rate overnight, 18% compounded monthly. They'd garnished 40% of Rebecca's pension. Every phone call was a threat wrapped in legal language. Every letter was a countdown to catastrophe. Natalie had worked 3 jobs: barista at Starbucks from 5 to 11 in the morning, hands perpetually scalded from steam wands and espresso machines. Retail at Target from noon to 6, feet aching in cheap shoes as she restocked shelves and smiled at customers who treated her like furniture. Pizza delivery from 7 to midnight, racing through red lights in her dying Honda Civic, hoping the tips would be enough. It was never enough. The Crimson was her last option. She'd heard about it from a girl at the coffee shop. The pay was insane, the girl had whispered. $200 a night, sometimes more. But the work was dangerous. The owner was dangerous. Girls disappeared. But Natalie was out of options and out of time. She pushed the buzzer. The sound was harsh in the rain-soaked silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door cracked open, revealing a man who looked more like a refrigerator wrapped in a suit than a human being. Victor Hayes stood 6 feet 4 inches tall. His shoulders filled the doorway completely. A scar ran down his left cheek, pale and raised against his dark skin. His eyes were flat and emotionless as he looked Natalie up and down. He saw the frayed hem of her skirt. He saw the water-damaged boots held together with duct tape. He saw the desperation in her eyes. Name? His voice was a bass rumble like distant thunder. Natalie. Natalie Brooks. I'm here for the 9 o'clock trial. Victor's expression didn't change. You know who owns this place, girl? Mr. Russo? Her voice was steadier than she felt. Gabriel Russo, Victor corrected her sharply. And you don't speak his name inside. You don't look at him. You don't breathe in his direction unless he orders you to. He stepped aside, letting her into a small vestibule. The walls were painted deep crimson. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows. Victor closed the door behind her, and the sound of the rain disappeared. The silence was absolute. We've gone through 5 girls this month. The last one spilled a drop of scotch on the table. She didn't finish her shift. She didn't finish the walk to her car. Natalie swallowed hard against the fear rising in her throat. I need this job, sir. I won't make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, Victor muttered as he opened the inner door. Come in. But if you die tonight, don't haunt me. I warned you. The Crimson was breathtakingly beautiful and terrifyingly quiet. The main room opened up before her like the interior of a cathedral dedicated to vice. The ceiling was high and vaulted, disappearing into shadows above. Chandeliers hung on long chains, their crystals catching the amber light and scattering it across the space. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, polished to a mirror shine. Leather booths occupied the perimeter, each one positioned to offer privacy and sightlines. It smelled of expensive leather, aged mahogany, and something else. something metallic and sharp that Natalie's animal brain recognized as fear. Men in suits sat in shadowed booths, speaking in hushed tones. They were all dressed impeccably. $1,000 watches caught the light. Diamond cufflinks glinted. These were not street criminals. These were the men who owned the street criminals. They discussed shipping containers and union strikes in the same tone other men used to discuss the weather. Natalie was thrown into the deep end immediately. Victor shoved a tray into her hands, the silver cold against her palms. Table 4 needs refills. Table 7 wants ice. And Table 1? Victor paused, his face paling slightly even in the dim light. Table 1 is the boss. He's not here yet. But when he arrives, you become a ghost. You fill the glass. You step back into the shadows. Do you understand? Yes. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. For 3 hours, Natalie was perfect. She moved with the grace of a dancer, silent and efficient. She'd learned to be invisible in her retail job, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. She navigated the treacherous currents of the mobsters with the same skill, ignoring the lewd comments from the lower-level soldiers at Table 4, dodging the groping hands at the bar. She focused entirely on the math. 1 night equals $200 in tips. 7 nights equals $1,400. It would stall the hospital. It would buy her time to figure something else out. It had to be enough. Then at midnight, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was a physical change, like the air had been sucked out of the room and replaced with something heavier, more oppressive. The music, a low jazz number playing from hidden speakers, lowered to barely audible. The loud laughter at Table 4 died instantly, cut off mid-sentence. Men straightened in their seats. Conversations stopped. The double doors swung open. Gabriel Russo walked in, and Natalie understood immediately why everyone feared him. He wasn't what she'd expected from the news clips and blurry police photos. In person, he was devastating. He stood perhaps 6 feet 3 inches tall, wearing a suit that cost more than Natalie's entire life earnings. The fabric was so black it seemed to absorb light. His hair was dark and slicked back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp cheekbones. A jaw that looked like it could cut glass. And his eyes. Even from across the room, Natalie could see they were the color of cold steel. He didn't walk. He prowled. Each step was deliberate and controlled. A predator moving through territory he owned absolutely. 2 armed guards flanked him, but they were unnecessary. Gabriel Russo's presence was weapon enough. He moved to Table 1, the VIP booth elevated slightly above the rest of the floor. He sat down with fluid grace, and the entire room seemed to pivot around him like planets orbiting a dark star. Natalie froze near the service station, her hands gripping the edge of the polished wood bar. Vance, Victor's hiss, made her jump. He'd appeared beside her, silently. Table 1, a bottle of the Fort William Dalmore. 2 glasses. Go now. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape her chest. Her hands shook as she grabbed the tray. She grabbed the crystal glasses, each one worth more than her monthly rent. She grabbed the bottle that cost $8,000, the amber liquid inside glowing like liquid gold in the low light. She walked toward the lion's den. As she approached, she kept her eyes on the floor, watching the polished tips of Gabriel Russo's shoes, Italian leather recently shined. Each step she took felt like walking to her own execution. Her breathing was shallow. Her palms were sweating despite the cold. She set the coaster down softly on the table, perfectly centered. She placed the glass. Her hands had stopped shaking through sheer force of will. She began to pour the amber liquid, watching the whiskey climb the crystal walls of the glass. You're late with the shipment, Russo. Gabriel's voice was a deep baritone, smooth like velvet draped over a razor blade. The man across from him was heavy-set and sweating profusely, despite the cool temperature of the club. His name was Antonio Russo, no relation. His jowls quivered as he spoke. Enzo, please. The feds were sniffing around the docks. I had to ditch the cargo. You ditched $2 million of my product because you saw a patrol car? Gabriel asked the question calmly, casually, as if he were asking about the weather. He picked up the glass Natalie had just poured and examined it in the light. I panicked. I can make it back. Gabriel took a sip, his movements precise and controlled. You can't make back time, Russo. You wasted mine. Natalie finished pouring the second glass. She was about to step back, to vanish into the shadows as instructed, when Russo threw his hands up to plead. His hand struck Natalie's tray with enough force to send it flying. It happened in slow motion. The heavy silver tray clipped the edge of the crystal bottle still sitting on the table. The bottle wobbled, teetering on its base. $8,000 of whiskey about to shatter across marble. Natalie lunged. It was pure reflex, the same instinct that made her catch falling coffee cups at Starbucks, that made her grab merchandise before it hit the floor at Target. She ignored the rule about invisibility. She ignored the rule about not moving quickly near the boss. She threw her hand out and caught the $8,000 bottle by the neck just millimeters before it hit the tabletop. But in doing so and lunging across the table with her arm extended, the momentum created a wave. A distinct arc of dark amber whiskey splashed across the pristine white cuff of Gabriel Russo's shirt. Silence. Absolute suffocating silence descended on the crimson like a blanket of snow. Even the music had stopped, though Natalie couldn't remember hearing it cut out. The bartender, halfway through shaking a martini, froze with the shaker in midair. Victor, watching from the corner, covered his eyes with one massive hand. Gabriel Russo froze. He slowly lowered his glass to the table. He looked at the stain on his cuff, the amber liquid darkening the white fabric. Then, for the first time since entering the room, he lifted his eyes. He looked directly at Natalie. Natalie couldn't breathe. She was still bent over the table, her body at an awkward angle, the bottle clutched in her white-knuckled grip. She met his gaze, and it was like looking into the heart of a winter storm. His eyes were terrifying, intelligent and predatory, and currently blazing with a cold fury that made her bones turn to ice. You. Gabriel's voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. What is your name? Natalie straightened up slowly, clutching the bottle to her chest like a shield. Her mother's face flashed through her mind. The hospital bed with its thin sheets and beeping monitors. The debt collector's letters piled on the kitchen table. If she died tonight, who would pay the bills? Who would sit with her mother in those final hours? The thought gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Natalie. Her voice didn't crack. She forced the word out clearly, meeting his eyes without flinching. Natalie. Gabriel repeated the name slowly, as if testing the sound of it in his mouth. He stood up, unfolding from the booth with the fluid grace of a big cat. He towered over her, and this close she could smell sandalwood and gunpowder and something darker underneath. Do you know what happens to people who ruin my suits? Russo, eager to deflect attention from his own catastrophic failure, jumped in. Stupid girl. Look what you did to the boss. You should be taken out back and taught some respect. Shut up. Gabriel said it without looking at Russo. His eyes never left Natalie's face. He stepped closer. Natalie could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could see a small scar at the corner of his mouth, a thin white line against olive skin. She could see the way his pupils dilated slightly as he studied her. He reached out his hand. Natalie flinched, every muscle in her body tensing for a blow. But instead of striking her, he simply took the bottle from her hands with surprising gentleness and set it on the table. You have fast hands. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that only she could hear. But you're clumsy. It wasn't my fault. The words burst out of Natalie before she could stop them. The room gasped. It was an audible sound, a collective intake of breath from every person present. Victor looked like he was about to have a stroke, his hand pressed against his chest. You never spoke back to Gabriel Russo. Never. Gabriel tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. Excuse me? Natalie's fear transformed into something else. Anger. Righteous fury at the unfairness of it all. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd saved his expensive whiskey, and now she was going to die because some idiot had flailed his arms? He hit the tray. Natalie pointed a shaking finger at Russo, whose face was turning purple. He was flailing his arms because he's scared of you. I caught the bottle. I saved your liquor. The stain? That was collateral damage. Russo turned an even deeper shade of purple. You lying little piece of trash. Gabriel held up one hand. Silence returned immediately, absolute and total. He looked at Russo, then he looked at Natalie. The air crackled with tension so thick it felt like static electricity before a lightning strike. Gabriel Russo wasn't used to being answered. He wasn't used to eye contact from staff. And he certainly wasn't used to a waitress in a cheap skirt telling him the facts of the situation. A corner of Gabriel's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something darker, more complex. Like he'd just discovered something unexpected and wasn't sure whether to be amused or offended. Get a towel, he ordered her. Natalie nodded and rushed to the service station. Her legs felt like water beneath her. Her hands were shaking again as she grabbed a clean white towel and ran it under warm water. When she returned, she fully expected to be fired. Or shot, or both. Instead, Gabriel Russo held out his wrist to her. Clean it. Natalie paused. She would have to touch him. Touch the man whose mere presence could silence a room full of hardened criminals. Her rough, work-worn hands would brush against his skin, the hands that smelled like espresso and pizza grease and desperation. She had no choice. She reached out carefully. Her fingers brushed against his wrist as she took it gently. His skin was warm, warmer than she'd expected. Smooth and unmarred except for what looked like the edge of a tattoo disappearing under his shirt cuff. She could feel the steady, slow pulse of his blood beneath the skin. Strong and unhurried, like his heart beat at a different rhythm than normal people. She dabbed at the whiskey stain on his cuff with the warm towel. The amber liquid was already setting into the expensive fabric. It would need professional cleaning. Probably the shirt was ruined. He was watching her. She could feel his gaze burning into the top of her head as she worked. The weight of his attention was physical, like a hand pressing down on her shoulders. "You're not afraid of me," Gabriel observed quietly so only she could hear. Natalie looked up, pausing in her cleaning. Their faces were inches apart. She could see gold flecks in his steel gray eyes. She could see the way his jaw clenched and unclenched almost imperceptibly. "I'm terrified of you, Mr. Russo." The words came out honest and raw. "But I need this job more than I need to breathe right now." Gabriel stared at her for a long, agonizing second. Something shifted behind his eyes, some calculation being made that Natalie couldn't begin to understand. Then he pulled his arm back, breaking the contact. "Get out of my sight." His voice was cold again, the brief moment of connection vanishing like it had never existed. Natalie turned and walked away. Her legs felt like jelly. Her heart was still racing. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. "And Natalie," she froze, not daring to turn around. "See you tomorrow night. Don't be late." Natalie exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She had survived. But as she retreated to the kitchen on shaking legs, she didn't see the way Gabriel Russo watched her go. She didn't see the way he ignored Russo completely, leaving the man sweating and forgotten. She didn't notice that the room remained silent until she disappeared through the kitchen doors. She didn't know that by surviving, she hadn't escaped the web. She had just entangled herself in the very center of it. The next 3 nights were a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion. Natalie expected retaliation, some punishment for her insolence. But instead, she got something far worse. Attention, not overt attention. Gabriel Russo didn't speak to her again, but every night he was in the club, which was every night now, unusually. Victor mentioned it in passing. The boss normally only came in twice a week, he'd said. But since Tuesday, he'd been there every single night, and Natalie could feel his eyes on her. When she poured drinks for other tables, she could feel the weight of his gaze following her movements. When she wiped down the bar, polishing the wood until it gleamed, she knew he was watching. When she walked to the kitchen, she could sense his attention tracking her like a wolf watching a deer graze in a meadow, waiting for the wind to change direction. The other men noticed. The tips were incredible. By Friday night, Natalie had $800 cash tucked into her bra, more money than she'd made in a month at her other 3 jobs combined. The mobsters who'd ignored her before now treated her with a strange sort of respect. Or perhaps they were just scared to touch what might be Gabriel Russo's new toy. She didn't know which was worse. Friday night was different from the others. Friday was collection night. The vibe in the Crimson was sharper, more aggressive. The music was louder to cover conversations that couldn't be overheard. Men came in carrying briefcases and left without them. The air smelled like cigar smoke and gunpowder and greed. Around 1 in the morning, the club was clearing out. The lower-level soldiers had been dismissed. Only the inner circle remained, men in expensive suits who spoke in languages Natalie didn't understand, discussing matters she didn't want to know about. Victor appeared at her elbow, making her jump. "Boss wants a coffee. Black, 2 sugars. Bring it to the back office." Natalie froze, her blood turning to ice. "I thought no staff goes back there." "You do what you're told," Victor snapped, though his eyes held something that might have been pity. "He asked for you specifically." Natalie prepared the coffee with trembling hands. The back office. She'd heard the rumors. The carpet was red so blood wouldn't show. Men went in and didn't come out. It was where the real business happened, the kind that left bodies in the Chicago River. She walked down the long, dimly lit corridor that led away from the main room. The walls seemed to close in on her with each step. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor, each sound impossibly loud in the silence. She reached the heavy oak door at the end of the hall. She knocked, the sound muffled and dull. "Enter." She pushed the door open with her shoulder, balancing the coffee cup and saucer carefully. The office was opulent, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books that looked like they'd never been read. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. The air was thick with cigar smoke that hung in lazy spirals. Gabriel Russo sat behind the desk, reading a file with his reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked different with the glasses, almost scholarly, almost human. But he wasn't alone. There was a man tied to a chair in the center of the room. His face was bruised, swollen, and discolored. His lip was split, blood dried in a dark line down his chin. His expensive suit was torn and stained. Natalie recognized him immediately. Councilman Robert Miller. She'd seen him on the news just last week, smiling and shaking hands at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Natalie stopped in the doorway. The coffee cup rattled against the saucer, the only sound in the room. Gabriel looked up from his file. He didn't look concerned that she'd just walked in on what was clearly a felony in progress. He simply removed his reading glasses and set them aside. Put it on the desk. Natalie forced her feet to move. Don't look at the man in the chair. Just walk. Put the coffee down. Leave. She repeated it like a mantra in her head. She walked past Councilman Miller, who whimpered through a gag stuffed in his mouth. She placed the coffee next to Gabriel's hand close enough that he wouldn't have to reach. Thank you. She turned to leave, her entire body screaming at her to run. Natalie. She stopped, her hand on the doorknob. Close the door. She closed it, the soft click of the latch loud as a gunshot. She turned back slowly, her back against the door, her hand still gripping the knob behind her. Gabriel stood up, moving around the desk with unhurried grace. He leaned against it, crossing his arms over his chest. The muscles in his forearms flexed under the rolled-up sleeves of his shirt. Do you know who this is, Natalie? I don't know anything. The words came out fast, desperate. I'm just the waitress. This is Councilman Miller. Gabriel said it conversationally, as if discussing the weather. He took a very large loan from me to fund his campaign. Now he says he can't rezone the warehouse district for my imports. The man in the chair made muffled sounds of protest through the gag. I have a problem, Natalie, Gabriel continued, his steel gray eyes never leaving her face. I need someone to deliver a message to Miller's wife. Let her know that unless the zoning permits are signed by Monday, her husband won't be coming home. Natalie felt her stomach drop. Why are you telling me this? Because my men are thugs. They lack subtlety. If I send one of them to the wife, she'll call the police immediately. But you, he looked her up and down, not sexually but appraisingly, like she was a tool he was considering purchasing. You look innocent. You look like a concerned citizen. A poor struggling girl who just heard a rumor. I'm not a criminal. Natalie stepped back until she hit the door. I serve drinks. That's it. Gabriel pushed off from the desk and closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He placed his hands on the door on either side of her head, boxing her in. He didn't touch her, but his heat radiated onto her skin. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, the sandalwood of his cologne. We are all criminals, Natalie. His whisper was intimate, almost gentle. It's just a matter of price. Victor tells me you've been picking up extra shifts. You count your tips in the alleyway. You wear shoes that have holes in the soles. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He fanned it open, and Natalie saw $100 bills. Stacks of them. $10,000. Just to go to a house in the suburbs, ring the doorbell, hand her a phone so I can speak to her, then leave. Natalie stared at the money. It was almost exactly what she needed for her mother's treatment. Blood money. Dirty, evil money. But her mother's doctor had called that morning. They were going to stop treatment on Monday. Without payment, Rebecca Brooks had maybe 3 months left. Her voice failed her. Everyone has a price. Gabriel leaned down so his lips brushed her ear, his voice dropping even lower. What is yours, little waitress? Your dignity or your survival? Natalie looked at the councilman, then at the money, and finally into Gabriel Russo's dark abyss-like eyes. She realized then that this wasn't just a job offer. It was a test. He was seeing if she could be corrupted. If the sweet-faced waitress with holes in her shoes had a price. She snatched the envelope from his hand. I need the address. Gabriel smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, and it was terrifyingly handsome. The transformation was startling. For just a moment, she could see the man he might have been in another life. Before the violence. Before the blood. Good girl. He handed her a slip of paper and a burner phone. The paper had an address in Oak Park, one of the wealthy suburbs where lawyers and doctors lived behind manicured lawns and security systems. You take my car. Dante will drive you. Do not try to run, Natalie. I know where you live. I know about your mother at St. Jude's. Natalie's blood ran cold. The casual way he said it, like he was commenting on the weather, made it clear this wasn't an idle threat. If you touch her, I don't hurt civilians unless I have to. Gabriel cut her off, his voice firm. Do this job and your mother's medical bills are paid for the next 6 months. Cross me and the hospital loses power during her next treatment. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of terms. Natalie turned and fled the room, clutching the money and phone like they were burning her hands. As she walked back down the corridor, she could feel the weight of what she'd just agreed to settling onto her shoulders like a yoke. The black SUV was waiting in the alley behind the Crimson. Dante Moretti sat behind the wheel, a mountain of a man with arms covered in tattoos that disappeared under his black shirt. He didn't speak as Natalie climbed into the back seat. He simply put the vehicle in gear and pulled into traffic. The drive to Oak Park took 30 minutes. Natalie sat in silence, watching the city pass by outside the tinted windows. She realized she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was an accomplice, a criminal, one of them. The Miller residence was exactly what she'd expected. A sprawling colonial-style house with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. Every window glowed with warm light. A BMW sat in the driveway next to a Mercedes. This was old money, the kind that came with connections and country club memberships. It was 2 in the morning. Natalie walked up the stone pathway on shaking legs. She rang the bell, the chime echoing inside the house. For a moment, nothing happened, and she had the wild hope that no one would answer, that she could go back and tell Gabriel she'd tried. Then the door opened. Mrs. Miller stood there in a silk robe, her face tight with fear and exhaustion. She was younger than Natalie expected, maybe 40, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Yes, Mrs. Miller?" Natalie's voice shook. "I have a call for you. It's about your husband." She held out the burner phone. Mrs. Miller stared at it like it was a snake, then slowly took it with trembling fingers. She lifted it to her ear. Natalie couldn't hear what Gabriel said, but she watched the color drain from Mrs. Miller's face. The woman listened for maybe 10 seconds, her free hand gripping the doorframe so hard her knuckles turned white. Then she nodded once, twice, and handed the phone back to Natalie without a word. The door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the frame. Job done. When Natalie returned to the Crimson, the councilman was gone. The back office was empty except for Gabriel, who stood by the window pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter. Amber liquid splashed into the glass, catching the light. "Did she take the call?" he asked without turning around. "Yes." Natalie threw the burner phone onto his desk. "I'm going home." "You did well." Gabriel turned to face her, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "You have potential, Natalie. You're smart. You act under pressure. You're desperate. That makes you dangerous." "I'm not dangerous." Natalie spat the words. "I'm trapped. There's a difference." "Is there?" Gabriel stopped inches from her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of wet hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline, warm against her cold skin. The touch sent a jolt of electricity down her spine that she hated herself for feeling. "You liked the power, didn't you? Holding that woman's fate in your hand." "Number." The lie came automatically. "Liar," Gabriel whispered. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "Go home to your mother, Natalie. But remember, you belong to me now." Natalie ran out of the club into the rainy night, clutching the cash to her chest. She had saved her mother. She had bought time. But as she walked down the dark street toward the bus stop, she couldn't shake the feeling of Gabriel's touch on her skin, the way his eyes had darkened when he'd called her a liar. She had broken the rules of the underworld and survived. But she knew the game was only just beginning. She thought the night was over. She was wrong. As she unlocked her apartment door, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her hands shook as she answered. "Natalie!" The voice was panicked. It was Victor. "What is it?" "I just left." "Don't go back to your apartment." Victor's words came fast and urgent. "The Irish mob, the Canes, they saw you leave the Miller house. They know you're working for Russo. They're coming for you, Natalie. You need to run." Natalie dropped her keys. The metallic jangle was loud in the silent hallway. Then she heard it, heavy footsteps thundering up the stairs of her building. Multiple sets, moving fast. She was trapped. She couldn't go into her apartment. It was a dead end with one window that looked out over a 4-story drop. If she locked herself in, they would kick the door down in seconds. She looked up. The access hatch to the roof. She scrambled up the rusty metal ladder built into the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The envelope of cash fell from her coat, scattering $100 bills down the stairwell, but she didn't stop. She shoved the heavy hatch open. Rain immediately soaked her face, cold and brutal. She hauled herself onto the tar paper roof and slammed the hatch shut, sitting on it with all her weight. The roof was slick with Chicago rain. The city lights blurred in the distance, a million windows glowing with indifferent warmth. Up here, The wind was fierce, cutting through her wet clothes and stealing the breath from her lungs. Then the hatch beneath her bucked. Someone was shoving it from below. Hard. Natalie scrambled backward, slipping on the wet surface. Her hands found no purchase. The hatch flew open with a screech of rusted metal protesting. A hand emerged, large and pale and covered in faded tattoos. Prison tattoos. "Here, kitty, kitty!" A rough voice sneered from below. A man climbed out onto the roof. He was massive, wearing a leather jacket that creaked as he moved. His face was pockmarked and cruel. He was followed by a second man, leaner, with a jagged scar running down his cheek like someone had tried to split his face in half. The Irish, the Canes. "Nowhere to run, darling." The scarred man flicked a switchblade open. The metal caught the dim glow of the street lamps below. Gabriel Russo sends a waitress to do a soldier's job. Insulting, really. Natalie backed away until her heels hit the low parapet at the roof's edge. It was a 4-story drop to the alley below. Certain death. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I just delivered a phone. And that phone call cost us a very lucrative zoning deal." The big man growled. He lunged forward with surprising speed for someone his size. Natalie screamed and kicked out. Her boot connected with his shin, but it was like kicking a tree trunk. He barely flinched. His hand shot out and grabbed her ankle, yanking hard. Natalie hit the wet roof with brutal force, the air exploding from her lungs. He dragged her toward him, the rough gravel of the roof scraping her skin through her thin clothes. "We're going to have a little chat," the man whispered, leaning over her. His breath smelled like cigarettes and decay. "And then we're going to send you back to Russo in pieces." Natalie squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the knife. Bang! The sound wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of the metal roof access door on the opposite side of the building slamming open with enough force to dent the frame. The fire escape side, the Cane thugs froze. A silhouette stood on the edge of the roof, outlined by the ambient glow of the city. A long black trench coat whipped in the wind like the wings of some avenging angel. A gun was held loosely at his side, pointed at the ground but ready. "Gentlemen," the voice was calm, almost bored. "You seem to have mistaken my staff for yours." It was Gabriel Russo. "Russo?" The scarred man hissed, stepping back from Natalie. "You're alone on our turf." Gabriel stepped forward into the better light cast by the building's security floods. The rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead, making him look more beast than man. Water ran down his face, but his expression remained utterly calm. "I'm never alone." His voice carried across the roof despite the wind. "But for you two, I don't need backup." The big man released Natalie and pulled a gun from his waistband. He was too slow. Gabriel raised his weapon with terrifying speed, the movement so smooth it looked choreographed. 2 suppressed shots coughed into the rainy night. Pop, pop. The big man screamed, clutching his knee as it exploded in a spray of blood and bone. He collapsed instantly, his gun clattering across the wet roof and disappearing over the edge. The scarred man hesitated, looking between his fallen partner, writhing on the ground, and the barrel of Gabriel's gun now pointed directly at his chest. "Drop it!" Gabriel's command was quiet but absolute. The knife clattered to the roof. Gabriel walked past the men as if they were garbage on the sidewalk, not worth his attention. He holstered his gun in one smooth motion and reached down to Natalie. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold fury barely held in check. "Get up!" Natalie took his hand. His grip was iron hard, unyielding. He pulled her to her feet and steadied her when her knees buckled. His other hand came up to cup her face, tilting it to examine her in the dim light. "Are you hurt?" "I think I'm okay," Natalie stammered. "How did you know?" "I told you." Gabriel pulled off his trench coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm and smelled like him. "You belong to me now. I watch what is mine." He turned back to the scarred man, who was trembling and trying to help his wounded partner. "Tell Connor Kane that if he touches another hair on her head, I will burn the entire south side to the ground." Gabriel's voice was soft, which somehow made the threat more terrifying. "Run." The man grabbed his partner under the arms and they scrambled for the fire escape, leaving a trail of blood across the wet roof. Gabriel turned to Natalie. "We have to go now." "My stuff," Natalie cried, looking toward the roof hatch. "Mom's medicine list, my clothes. Everything." "Forget it." Gabriel's hand was firm on her arm, guiding her toward the fire escape. "Your old life ended the moment you took that envelope, Natalie. You're a ghost now." Down in the alley, the black SUV was waiting with Dante behind the wheel. He opened the rear door without a word. Gabriel guided Natalie inside and climbed in after her, his hand never leaving the small of her back. "Home," Gabriel said to Dante. "My apartment," Natalie started. "Burned." Gabriel's tone was flat, matter of fact. "By morning, Kane will torch it looking for evidence. You can never go back there." Natalie slumped it against the leather seat as the adrenaline began to crash. She started shaking violently, her teeth chattering despite the warmth of Gabriel's coat around her shoulders. She was homeless. She was a target for a mob war, and she was sitting next to the most dangerous man in Chicago. Gabriel didn't speak. He simply reached into the minibar console, poured a glass of water, and handed it to her. Then he took her hand, the one that was shaking so badly she could barely hold the glass, and held it in his own. He rested their joined hands on the center console between them. He didn't let go for the entire drive. In the silence, Natalie studied Gabriel's profile. His jaw was clenched tight enough that she could see the muscle jumping. His eyes were hard, fixed on the road ahead through the windshield, but his thumb moved unconsciously against the back of her hand, stroking in a rhythm that might have been soothing if it came from anyone else. She realized something then. He had been scared, not for himself, for her. This brutal, untouchable man had feared losing her. Something shifted in Natalie's chest. Not love, not yet, but a recognition that Gabriel Russo might be more than just a monster. That underneath the violence and the power, there might be a man who understood desperation, who acted when the stakes were highest. She didn't pull her hand away. Gabriel's home wasn't a house. It was a fortress. The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of the Russo Spire, a gleaming tower of glass and steel in downtown Chicago that he owned outright. The elevator required a biometric scan to access the top floors. Gabriel pressed his thumb to the scanner, then pulled Natalie's hand forward to scan hers as well. Now you have access. He said it simply, like he was giving her a key to a storage unit and not access to what was probably a $30 million penthouse. The elevator opened directly into a living room that was larger than the entire floor of Natalie's apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, the lights stretching to the horizon in every direction. The furniture was modern and minimal, chrome and leather and glass. Everything was in shades of black and white and gray. Dante, stay downstairs, Gabriel ordered as they stepped out. No one comes up without my biometric clearance. Yes, boss. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving them alone in the humming silence. Natalie stood in the middle of the vast room, dripping rainwater and blood onto the pristine white marble floor. She felt small and dirty and utterly out of place, like a stray dog someone had brought into a palace. Gabriel walked to a control panel on the wall. The lights dimmed to a warm amber glow. A fireplace along one wall ignited with the press of a button, gas flames dancing over fake logs. He turned back to her, shrugging out of his wet shirt. Underneath his torso was a map of old violence. Scars crisscrossed his abdomen, a bullet wound near his ribs, burns along his left side. Guest suite is down the hall, second door on the left. He rolled up the sleeves of a fresh shirt he'd pulled from somewhere. There are clothes in the closet. They might be big, they belong to someone else. He didn't elaborate. A sister? A girlfriend? Natalie didn't ask. Shower, change, then come out. We need to talk. The bathroom was larger than Natalie's entire bedroom had been. Marble and chrome gleamed under recessed lighting. The shower had 6 different heads and controls that looked like they belonged in a spaceship. Natalie stripped off her soaked clothes and stood under scalding water for 20 minutes, scrubbing the feeling of the cane thug's hands off her skin, scrubbing away the fear and the adrenaline, and the knowledge that she'd almost died on that roof. She found a silk robe in the closet, emerald green and probably worth more than her car. She wrapped it around herself, cinching the belt tight, and padded back out to the living room on bare feet. Gabriel stood by the window with a glass of whiskey, looking out over his kingdom. He'd set out a plate of food on the coffee table. Simple sandwiches, fruit, bottled water. The consideration of it caught Natalie off guard. Eat, he said without turning around. Natalie realized she was starving. She sat on the leather couch and ate quickly, messily, not caring about manners. Gabriel watched her reflection in the glass window, his face unreadable. Why? Natalie asked when she'd finished. Gabriel finally turned to face her. Why what? Why did you come for me yourself? You have hundreds of soldiers. You could have sent Dante, but you came. You risked yourself on that roof. Gabriel walked over and sat in the armchair opposite of her. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. The mask slipped slightly, revealing something almost human underneath. Because it was my fault. His voice was low, rough. I involved you. I underestimated Connor Kane's surveillance network. I don't like cleaning up messes, Natalie, but I never let others pay my debts. So I'm a debt? A spark of anger flared in Natalie's chest. A liability? You are a complication. Gabriel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. But you're also intriguing. Here's the situation. The Kanes think you know something valuable. They think you are my new confidant because I sent you to Miller. If I let you go, they will find you and torture you and kill you. If I give you money and put you on a bus to another city, they will track you down within a week. Natalie's heart sank, so I'm trapped. You are protected. Gabriel's tone shifted, becoming businesslike. You stay here, in the penthouse. Dante will bring your mother whatever she needs at the hospital. I've already transferred funds to St. Jude's. She's covered for full treatment for 1 year. Natalie's eyes widened. A year? That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money is not an issue for me. Gabriel dismissed it with a wave. Loyalty is, safety is. What do I have to do? Natalie asked suspiciously. What's the price for this golden cage? Gabriel stood and walked to a grand piano in the corner of the room. He ran a finger along the keys but didn't play, just traced the smooth ivory thoughtfully. You work for me, not as a waitress, as my assistant, my shadow. When I go to galas and charity events, you're on my arm. When I have meetings here, you take notes and manage schedules. You maintain the image that I'm a legitimate businessman. You want me to be a prop, Natalie said flatly. I want you to be a shield. Gabriel turned, his steel eyes locking onto hers with uncomfortable intensity. People look at you, Natalie, and they see innocence. They see a sweet girl who couldn't possibly be involved in anything criminal. They don't suspect you. You soften my image, make me look less like a mobster and more like a successful businessman with a beautiful girlfriend. In return, you live like a queen. You save your mother, and you stay alive. It was a deal with the devil. Natalie knew that, but looking around at the warmth and safety of the penthouse, knowing her mother was finally getting proper care, she realized she had no choice. She'd already crossed too many lines to turn back now. Okay, the word came out as barely a whisper. Good. Gabriel's expression didn't change. Get some sleep. Tomorrow my tailor arrives at 8 in the morning. If you're going to be on my arm at these events, you need appropriate clothing. Natalie stood to go to the guest room, but she stopped at the hallway entrance. Gabriel. It was the first time she'd used his first name without the mister. He paused, looking at her with raised eyebrows. Thank you, for the roof. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a sudden tension that made it hard to breathe. Gabriel looked at her lips, then her eyes. For a long second, Natalie thought he might cross the room and kiss her. She could see the impulse there, the way his pupils dilated, the way his hand flexed at his side like he was physically restraining himself. But Gabriel Russo was a master of control. Good night, Natalie. His voice was curt, dismissive. Natalie went to the guest room and locked the door, though she knew the lock wouldn't stop him if he really wanted in. She lay in the massive bed, listening to the wind howl outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and tried not to think about the way her heart had raced when he'd looked at her mouth. The next few days passed in a blur of transformation. A parade of people came through the penthouse. A tailor who measured every inch of her body and returned 2 days later with dresses and suits and casual wear that fit perfectly. A hairstylist who cut and colored her hair, transforming her dishwater blonde into honeyed gold with subtle highlights. A makeup artist who taught her techniques she'd never learned from drugstore YouTube tutorials. Gabriel watched it all with a critical eye, approving some choices and rejecting others with a simple shake of his head. He was possessive and controlling in his perfectionism, but also strangely gentle. When the stylist pulled Natalie's hair too hard while working out a tangle, Gabriel's voice cut through the room like a whip. Careful! The stylist's hands immediately gentled. When Natalie winced trying on a pair of designer heels, Gabriel frowned and told the assistant to get her lower ones. She needs to walk, not hobble. It was 2 in the morning, 4 days into her new life, when Natalie found herself unable to sleep. She tried for hours, but her mind kept racing. She finally gave up and wandered out to the kitchen, thinking she might make some tea. She found Gabriel there, standing at the stove in dress pants and an unbuttoned white shirt. He was making pasta, the movements of his hands practiced and sure, as he stirred a pan of sauce that smelled incredible. You cook? Natalie couldn't hide her surprise. Gabriel glanced at her, then back at the pan. My grandmother taught me. Before, he trailed off, not finishing the sentence. Before what? A long pause. The only sound was the bubbling of the sauce and the whisper of the gas flame. Before I had people to do it for me. His voice was quiet. He pulled another plate from the cabinet without asking if she was hungry and began to serve the pasta. They ate at the kitchen island in comfortable silence, and for the first time since entering this world, Natalie felt almost normal. Gabriel told her stories about his grandmother in Sicily, about summers spent learning to make sauce from tomatoes grown in her garden, about a time before violence and blood. Natalie saw a glimpse of the man beneath the armor, and it terrified her more than any of the violence had. On the 4th day, Gabriel announced they had an event to attend, the mayor's charity ball. It would be Natalie's first public appearance on his arm, her debut as the legitimate girlfriend of a legitimate businessman. The Canes would be there, the Russos, every major player in Chicago's underworld, all dressed in tuxedos and gowns, pretending to be pillars of the community. Gabriel had his tailor deliver a dress. When Natalie saw it hanging in her closet, she understood immediately what he was doing. The dress was blood red, floor-length silk that clung to every curve, with a back that plunged dangerously low and a slit that rose high up her thigh. It wasn't just a dress, it was a declaration of ownership, a weapon made of fabric. When she stepped out of her room that evening, the air in the penthouse seemed to evaporate. Gabriel stood by the elevator, dressed in a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders like it had been painted on. He was adjusting his cufflinks, but when he looked up and saw her, his hands stilled completely. For a long, silent moment, the ruthless mafia capo was gone, replaced by a man struck utterly dumb by beauty. Is it too much? Natalie's voice wavered despite her attempt at confidence. Gabriel walked towards her slowly, his eyes darkening with a possessive heat that made her skin flush. He didn't stop until he was toe-to-toe with her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He reached out, his knuckles grazing the bare skin of her arm with feather-light pressure. It is exactly enough. His voice was rough, low. Tonight you are not Natalie the waitress. You are the Queen of Chicago. He placed a hand under her chin, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. Lift your chin. Do not look down. Not once. You are with me. The mayor's charity ball was held at the Grand Hall, a cathedral of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers in the heart of downtown. As Gabriel and Natalie entered, the room fell silent. It was the same silence from the Crimson, but magnified 100-fold. Hundreds of eyes turned to watch them. Politicians in expensive suits, judges who decided the fates of men, rival mobsters pretending to be legitimate businessmen. Gabriel placed a possessive hand on the small of Natalie's back, his fingers splayed across her bare skin. The touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine. He guided her through the crowd with absolute confidence, introducing her simply as Natalie, offering no last name, no explanation. Let them wonder. Russo, a voice boomed across the room. The police commissioner, a bald man with a thick neck and cold eyes, approached with a drink in his hand. Bold of you to show your face after the noise in the warehouse district last night. Gabriel smiled, and it was all teeth, a shark showing what it could do. I have no idea what you mean, Commissioner. I'm just a legitimate businessman enjoying the arts. Have you met Natalie? The commissioner's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, appraising, calculating. New associate? Something like that. Gabriel's hand tightened possessively on her waist. As the night wore on, Natalie played her part perfectly. She laughed at jokes that weren't funny. She sipped champagne she didn't drink, just letting it touch her lips. She leaned into Gabriel whenever he touched her, and he touched her constantly. A hand on her waist, a brush of fingers against her neck, the ghost of his breath on her shoulder when he leaned in to whisper something meaningless in her ear. It was a performance, but the heat radiating between them was confusingly real. The music changed to a slow waltz. Gabriel took her hand without asking, sweeping her onto the dance floor before she could refuse. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer, leading her with firm, confident movements that left no room for missteps. Natalie felt breathless, spinning in his arms. For a moment, she forgot the danger. She forgot the violence. She just saw the man who had saved her on the roof, who made pasta at 2 a.m, who watched her with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. You're trembling, Gabriel whispered, pulling her closer so her chest pressed against his. It's the adrenaline. She lied. Is it? His gaze dropped to her lips. Suddenly, a hand tapped on Gabriel's shoulder, breaking the spell like shattered glass. Mind if I cut in? Gabriel stopped moving. His entire body went rigid, transforming in an instant from lover to predator. Natalie turned to see a man with cold, pale blue eyes and a cruel smile. He was dressed in an impeccable white suit that stood out among the sea of black tuxedos. Kane. Gabriel's voice dropped to a glacial temperature that made the air around them feel 20 degrees colder. Connor Kane nodded, his smile widening. Come now, don't be greedy, Russo. Share the beautiful lady. She doesn't dance with trash. Gabriel's grip on Natalie's waist tightened to the point of pain. It's a charity ball, Gabriel. Kane's dead eyes never left Natalie. Make a scene and the commissioner arrests us both. Let me have one dance, unless you're afraid of what I might tell her. Gabriel looked ready to snap Kane's neck right there on the polished dance floor. But he glanced around. The room was watching. Every eye was on them. A fight here would destroy his carefully constructed legitimate cover. Politicians would distance themselves. Judges would issue warrants. The empire he'd built would crumble. One song. Gabriel's voice was barely above a hiss. If you touch her improperly, I will cut your hands off in the parking lot. He stepped back, but his eyes never left them. Natalie could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical force as Connor Kane took her hand. Kane's skin was cold and clammy, like touching a corpse. He pulled her into the dance, but his movements were jerky and aggressive, nothing like Gabriel's fluid grace. He spun her so her back was to Gabriel, blocking her from view. So, Kane whispered, his breath hot on her ear, you're the little waitress who cost me a zoning permit. I don't know what you're talking about. Natalie tried to pull away, but his grip was like a steel trap. You think he's Prince Charming, don't you? Kane sneered. Saved you, paid mommy's bills, dressed you in silk and diamonds, playing the hero. He's a better man than you. The words came out braver than Natalie felt. Kane laughed, a dry, hacking sound that held no humor. Oh, sweet girl. Do you know why your mother is in debt? Do you know who owns the debt collection agency that froze her assets? Natalie felt ice flood her veins. What? Viper Financial. Kane whispered the words like a curse. It's a shell company. Buys medical debt and jacks up the interest rates to illegal levels. It's how they wash drug money, make it look legitimate. And do you know who owns Viper Financial? No. But even as she said it, Natalie felt the truth settling into her bones like poison. Gabriel Russo owns Viper Financial. Kane's smile was triumphant, cruel. He didn't save your mother, Natalie. He's the one who was killing her. He created the problem so he could swoop in and buy you with the solution. You're not his girlfriend. You're just another asset he acquired, another piece of property. The song ended. Kane released her with a small shove that made her stumble. Ask him. Ask your hero. Natalie stood frozen on the dance floor. Gabriel was at her side instantly, his hand reaching for her arm. Natalie, what did he say? She pulled her arm away like his touch burned. She looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the expensive suit and the power in the carefully constructed facade. And underneath it all, she saw the blood that paid for everything. Take me home. Her voice shook with a rage she had never felt before. Natalie, listen to me. Take me home, now. The drive back to this penthouse was suffocating. The silence in the back of the SUV was heavy enough to crush bones. Dante drove fast, sensing the tension crackling between his passengers like electricity before a lightning strike. Gabriel stared out the window, his jaw clenched so tight Natalie could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. She sat as far from him as possible, pressed against the opposite door, staring at the partition. Say it. Gabriel finally spoke, not turning his head. Whatever poison Kane dripped in your ear, say it. Natalie turned on him, her eyes blazing. Viper Financial. Gabriel stiffened. He slowly turned to face her. Street lights flickered across his features, casting him in alternating shadow and harsh light. Do you own it? She demanded. I own many companies. His voice was careful, controlled. Do you own it? She screamed the words. Yes. The admission came quietly. I own it. That company bought my mother's debt 6 months ago. Natalie's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. They tripled the interest. They garnished her pension. They are the reason I was working at that club. The reason I couldn't pay the hospital bills. The reason I was desperate enough to walk into the Crimson and beg for a job. She lunged at him, hitting his chest with her fists. The blows were ineffective against his solid frame, but she didn't care. You did this. You ruined us. And then you pretended to be the savior. You bought me with your own blood money. Gabriel caught her wrists. He didn't hurt her, but he held her firm, stopping the assault. Natalie, listen to me. I own the company, yes, but I don't manage the individual accounts. There are hundreds, thousands of debts in that portfolio. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know it was your mother until I ran the background check after you broke the bottle that first night. But you knew afterward. Natalie's scream filled the confined space. You knew when you gave me that envelope, when you sent me to Miller's wife, when you brought me to your penthouse. You let me believe you were generous. You let me think you were saving us. I fixed it. Gabriel roared back, losing his iron control for the first time. I wiped the debt. I paid the bills. Does it matter how we got here if the result is that she lives? It matters to me, Natalie sobbed. It makes everything a lie. You're a monster, Gabriel. Kane was right. The words hit him like a physical blow. Gabriel released her wrists and sat back, his face closing off. The cold mask returned, all traces of emotion vanishing behind walls of ice. Fine, his voice was empty. If I am a monster, then so be it. But monsters protect what is theirs. I am not yours. We'll see. Suddenly, the SUV swerved violently. The tires screamed against wet pavement. Natalie was thrown against the door, her head cracking against the window. A deafening boom shook the vehicle. The bulletproof glass on her side spiderwebbed, fractures spreading across the surface like frozen lightning, but it didn't shatter. "Ambush!" Dante yelled from the front. "Hold on!" Another explosion louder than the first. The rear tire blew out in a spray of rubber. The heavy SUV spun out of control on the rain-slicked highway, fishtailing wildly. Dante fought the wheel, but momentum won. They slammed into the concrete divider with a bone-jarring crash that threw Natalie into Gabriel. Metal screamed, glass shattered, smoke filled the cabin, acrid and choking. Natalie was dazed, her ears ringing from the impact. She tasted blood in her mouth. "Natalie!" Gabriel's voice cut through the fog. His hands were on her face, turning her head to look at him. Blood ran down his temple from a cut near his hairline. "Natalie, move! We have to move now." He kicked the door open. The sound of automatic gunfire erupted outside, deafening. Bullets pinged off the armored chassis, each impact like a hammer blow. Gabriel dragged Natalie out of the wreckage. Rain poured down, mixing with smoke and the hiss of steam from the ruined engine. "Dante!" Gabriel yelled toward the front of the vehicle. Dante was slumped over the steering wheel, unmoving. A spider web of cracks spread across the windshield from where his head had hit. Blood pooled on the dashboard. He was gone. Gabriel cursed viciously. He grabbed Natalie's hand and pulled her behind the concrete barrier. 3 black sedans had blocked the highway 50 yards ahead. Men with masks and assault rifles advanced through the rain, their weapons raised. The Canes, they hadn't waited for a polite war. They had come to execute Gabriel Russo and his new acquisition on Interstate 90. Gabriel shoved a pistol into Natalie's hand. The metal was heavy and warm, terrifying in its solidity. "Do you know how to use this?" "Number." The word came out as a sob. "Point and pull the trigger. Only if they get close." He pulled a submachine gun from under his tuxedo jacket. He had been armed the entire time at the ball. "Stay down, stay behind me." He rose up over the barrier and fired in short, controlled bursts. The muzzle flash lit up the rain. 2 of the advancing men dropped, their bodies crumpling to the wet asphalt. The others scrambled for cover behind their vehicles. "We can't stay here." Gabriel reloaded with practiced speed. "They'll flank us." "Gabriel, you're bleeding." Natalie gasped. The blood from his head wound had soaked his white collar, turning it crimson. "I've had worse." He looked at her, his eyes intense despite the chaos. "Natalie, I need you to trust me. I know you hate me right now. I know I'm the villain in your story. But if you want to see your mother again, you have to do exactly what I say. Run when I say run." Natalie looked at this gun in her hand, then at the men closing in, their shadows growing larger through the rain and smoke. Finally at Gabriel, who was using his own body as a shield between her and the bullets. He was a monster, but he was the only thing standing between her and death. "Tell me what to do. On 3, we run for the service exit. 50 yards. I'll cover you." Gabriel's voice was steady. 1. Bullets chipped the concrete inches from their heads, showering them with debris. 2. Gabriel looked at her one last time. "If I don't make it, go to the police. Tell them everything." 3. Go! Natalie scrambled to her feet and ran. Her heels broke immediately, so she kicked them off, sprinting barefoot across the wet highway. Behind her, Gabriel's gun roared, a constant thunder that drowned out even the rain. She heard men shouting, tires screeching, the wet slap of her feet on asphalt. She reached the metal service door and yanked it open. She turned back. Gabriel was running toward her, firing backward at their pursuers. But there were too many of them. A spray of bullets stitched across the pavement around him. One caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He stumbled and fell, hitting the ground hard. "No!" Natalie screamed. She didn't think. She raised the heavy pistol Gabriel had given her. She pointed it at the shadow approaching Gabriel's fallen form and pulled the trigger. The gun kicked like a mule, nearly breaking her wrist. The shot went wide, missing by yards. But it was enough. The gunman ducked for cover, and that single second of hesitation was all Gabriel needed. He scrambled to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder, and threw himself through the doorway. He tackled Natalie as he fell, both of them hitting the concrete floor of the maintenance tunnel. He kicked the door shut behind them and shot the lock, the bullet fusing the metal. They were in a dark tunnel that smelled of mold and stagnant water. Silence fell except for their ragged breathing and the distant pounding of fists on the sealed door. Gabriel slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the filthy floor. His tuxedo was ruined, soaked in blood and rain and dirt. His face had gone pale, almost gray. Natalie crawled over to him, her anger forgotten in the face of pure panic. "Gabriel, Gabriel, look at me!" He opened his eyes. They were hazy with pain. He looked at the gun still clutched in her hand, and a faint, pained smile touched his lips. "You broke the rules again, Waitress. You saved the boss." "Shut up," Natalie cried. ripping a strip of fabric from her expensive red dress. Don't you dare die on me. You owe me, you owe me everything. I know. Gabriel's whisper was barely audible. His head lolled back against the wall. I know. Natalie checked his pulse. It was fast and thready, his heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. They were trapped in a tunnel. The Canes were trying to break through the door, and the King of Chicago was bleeding out in her lap. She found Gabriel's phone in his pocket. Miraculously, it was unbroken. She scrolled through his contacts with shaking, blood-slicked fingers and found Victor's number. Boss? Victor answered on the first ring. It's Natalie. Gabriel's been shot. We're in a maintenance tunnel under Interstate 90, mile marker 47. The Canes are outside. We need extraction now. On my way. 10 minutes. Keep him conscious. Natalie looked down at Gabriel. His eyes were closed. Stay with me. Talk to me. What do you want to talk about? His words were slurred. Tell me about your sister. The clothes in the closet. Who was she? Gabriel's eyes focused slightly at the question. Lucia, my little sister. She died 8 years ago. What happened? Natalie pressed the makeshift bandage against his shoulder wound. He winced but didn't cry out. Leukemia. Treatable kind. But we were nobody then. Just kids from the West Side. Father died in a construction accident when I was 12. Mother worked 3 jobs. It still wasn't enough. His voice broke. Insurance denied treatment. Called it a pre-existing condition. Lucia was 12 years old. She died in my arms because I couldn't pay $50,000. Natalie's breath caught. She understood now. That's why you started Viper Financial. You bought debt companies. Gabriel nodded weakly. I thought if I controlled the debt, no one else would lose a sister. But it became business. Got corrupted. I forgot why I started. Until I saw you. Saw your mother's file. Saw Lucia all over again. I couldn't let it happen twice. Tears streamed down Natalie's face. You liquidated Viper's Chicago division, didn't you? Before the charity ball. Fired the managers. Wiped 200 families' debts. Cost me $4 million. Gabriel's eyes met hers. Worth it. To see you not hate me. You idiot. Natalie leaned down and kissed his forehead. You beautiful, broken idiot. The sound of heavy machinery echoed through the tunnel. A section of wall 20 feet away exploded inward in a shower of concrete dust. Victor and 6 armed men poured through, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Boss! Victor's face hardened when he saw Gabriel's condition. Get him to the safe house, now. Men lifted Gabriel onto a stretcher. Natalie stood on shaking legs, the gun still in her hand. Victor looked at her. Blood-soaked dress, bare feet, fierce eyes. He smiled slowly. You shot at them? I shot for him. Welcome to the family, Miss Brooks. The safe house was a small, dusty cabin on the outskirts of the city, hidden among bare trees and dead grass. For 3 days, the world thought Gabriel Russo was dead. News reports showed footage of the ambush site, police investigators swarming the wrecked SUV. Speculation ran wild about mob wars and power vacuums. Inside the cabin, Natalie Brooks learned the most important lesson of her life. Power isn't given, it is taken. She sat by the bed, watching Gabriel sleep. His fever had finally broken that morning. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, missing bone and major arteries. Painful but not fatal. She had stitched him up herself, her hands steady, her mind clear. The terrified waitress who had walked into the Crimson was gone. In her place was a woman who had shot at hitmen to save the man she loved. Gabriel stirred. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on the wooden ceiling, then on Natalie. You're still here. His voice was rough from disuse. I thought you'd run once the bleeding stopped. I don't run anymore. She reached for a glass of water and held it to his lips. Gabriel drank, then grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Why did you save me? After what you know about Viper. Natalie pulled her hand back and reached for the tablet she'd taken from the safe house. I accessed your accounts while you were sleeping. Gabriel stiffened. And I saw the ledger. I saw how you buy debt, and I saw the transfer you made 3 days before the charity ball. You didn't just pay my mother's bill. You liquidated the entire Chicago division of Viper. You fired the managers who harassed her. You shut down predatory loans for 200 families. Gabriel looked away, staring at the wall. Bad business. Too much heat. Liar. Natalie smiled, soft and genuine. You did it because you felt guilty. You're not a monster, Gabriel. You're just a man who forgot what it was like to be human. And now we have a kingdom to reclaim. Connor Kane is sitting in your chair at the Crimson. He thinks he won. Gabriel sat up, grimacing as his shoulder pulled. A dark, predatory grin spread across his face. Then let's go educate him. Natalie and Gabriel huddled over the tablet. She had spent 3 days studying his financial records, learning the architecture of his empire. Kane's weakness is the same as yours was. Money. He's overextended. Spent a fortune on this war. How do you know? Gabriel asked. Because I've been studying your books. I understand how this works now. The Kane Syndicate has $8 million in offshore loans. Loans your shell companies hold. Gabriel's eyes widened with understanding. You want to call them in? Not just call them in. I want to buy them. Transfer them to my name. Natalie, that makes you a target. I'm already a target. Difference is, now I have leverage. Gabriel studied her face for a long moment, then smiled. You magnificent, terrifying woman. The rain had stopped by the time they reached the city. It was Saturday night. The Crimson was packed with celebration. Connor Kane sat in Gabriel's booth, drinking Gabriel's whiskey, convinced he had won. The music was loud, thumping bass that shook the floor. No one noticed the back door opening. No one noticed the shadows moving through the kitchen until the music abruptly cut out. The lights slammed on, blindingly bright after the atmospheric amber glow. Silence swept through the room like a wave. Standing on the balcony overlooking the main floor was Gabriel Russo. His arm was in a sling, but he looked like a god of war returned from the dead. And standing next to him, her head held high, was Natalie. Get out of my seat, Kane, Gabriel's voice boomed through the sudden silence. Connor Kane dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor, whiskey spreading like blood. He scrambled to his feet, reaching for his gun. You're dead. I killed you. You missed. Gabriel's tone was almost bored. Suddenly, the doors burst open. Dozens of men poured in, but they weren't Kane's soldiers. They were Russo's loyalists, regrouped and hungry for revenge. They surrounded the room, cutting off every exit. Connor looked around, realizing he was trapped. His eyes found Natalie on the balcony, and his face twisted with rage. You little rat, you set me up. Natalie stepped forward to the railing. She looked down at the man who had threatened her, who represented everything evil in this world. I'm not a rat, Connor. I'm the woman who just bought your debt. She held up the tablet, turning it so he could see the screen. Viper Financial acquired the Kane Syndicate's offshore loans this morning. You're bankrupt, Connor. You can't pay your soldiers. And in this city, if you can't pay, she didn't need to finish. Connor's own bodyguard stepped away from him, leaving him isolated in the center of the room. Gabriel looked at Natalie, pride burning in his eyes. He leaned in and whispered in her ear. Checkmate. Guards dragged a screaming Connor Kane from the club. The room erupted into cheers. The king had returned, and he had brought a queen. Gabriel turned to Natalie. He didn't care about the crowd watching. He didn't care about the city spread out beyond the walls. He took her face in his good hand, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I told you, you belong to me. Natalie smiled, leaning into his touch. She closed the distance between them, rising on her toes. No, boss, we belong to each other. She kissed him, and for the first time in the history of the Crimson, the ruthless mafia capo was broken. Not by a bullet or a blade, but by a waitress who stole his heart. 6 months later, Natalie sat in the cafeteria of St. Jude's Medical Center, watching her mother walk toward her without assistance. Dr. Rebecca Brooks was in remission. Her color had returned. Her eyes were bright and clear. Mom, there's someone I want you to meet. Gabriel approached, a single rose in his hand. He was dressed in a simple suit. No bodyguards, no weapons visible. He handed the rose to Rebecca with a slight bow. Dr. Brooks, it's an honor. Rebecca studied him with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. So you're the mysterious boss of the logistics firm. Guilty as charged. Gabriel's smile was genuine. Rebecca turned to her daughter. He's dangerous, isn't he? Natalie didn't lie. Yes. But he loves you? Natalie looked at Gabriel, seeing past the violence to the man underneath. More than I ever thought possible. Rebecca sighed. Then I suppose I can't object. But hurt my daughter, Mr. Russo, and no amount of money will save you from me. Gabriel actually laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I believe you, Dr. Brooks. They walked out together into the Chicago afternoon. Gabriel's hand rested on the small of Natalie's back. Her head leaned against his shoulder. In the distance, the Crimson's red neon sign glowed against the skyline. The kingdom was theirs, but more importantly, they had each other. And in a world built on blood and violence, that was something worth fighting for.